In the city's throbbing heart, millions dwell, their lives entwined in an intricate web woven by the hands of fate. They traverse the same avenues under the same sky, a mosaic of strangers linked through unseen bonds. Each heartbeat, a story unknown to the other, and yet in the grand symphony of urban life, they compose a single entity.
And welcome into another episode of the 100-Year Podcast. My name is Dario Strange, and this week we have, I think, kind of one of the pioneers, not necessarily of creating software, but of using AI software. Someone who comes from, I think, a more traditional standpoint. And I think this is kind of Julie Wieland, first of all, to introduce you.
Very good.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, got the right pronunciation. I think you're going to see people like Julie more and more. But right now we're at kind of like a historic moment, and I'll kind of get into that a little bit later, you know, why today is a particularly historic moment in AI and creative works. But first of all, Julie, can you just first of all, you're coming from Germany, right? Are you originally from Germany, by the way?
I am not. I am from Luxembourg.
Ah, Luxembourg. That's where you went to school, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Luxembourg. Yeah. Okay. All right. So from Luxembourg, based in Germany, and just kind of give us like a sense of your background kind of as a creator. Like, what is your training? You know, how do you see yourself in the creative space?
Sure. So yeah, I've always been kind of a creative person. When I was 15 in Luxembourg, I went to art school. I finished art school there, and then, well, that's actually how I went to Germany. I went to Berlin for university for communication design. From there, I started my journey as a graphic designer, but I always held really close to every other creative hobbies. I really enjoyed taking photos. I was really into photography. Now I'm kind of fusing all of that into the whole generative space. It made it a lot more timely consumable. And yeah, trying to really mix traditional and generative tools right now.
So here's my question. So I went to art school prior to university. I went to art school as a child, and one of the things that they emphasized was kind of like having this broad palette of skills: sculpture, printmaking, just drawing with pen and ink, painting. Did you have a similar training kind of?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly the same stuff. So we really learned how to draw people like actually in a professional kind of way. We had art history from really like photography to painters to pretty much everything. And yeah, I really love that about it, because it really gives you that kind of skill set to just really adapt whatever you love doing, and really also like interchange all the stuff, like using photography with graphic design, or just like sculpting and then taking photos and further just like exploring with it.
So I want you to help me make the distinction, because I'm sure you can illustrate and draw, but I think you kind of describe yourself as a graphic designer. So give me the distinction that you make, from your point of view. What's the difference between a graphic designer and an artist, or not, like a visual artist, I'll say?
Yeah, sure. So actually, I'm not really good at drawing. That's why I never really pursued that really further. I can do some slight drawings, but not really the good kind of. So yeah, I do feel like art and design are pretty differently. So art can just like evoke emotions, and it doesn't really have to serve a certain point. Whereas design, as a graphic designer, I really have to go about it and finding a solution with that design. So I am mainly focusing on marketing design and everything really surrounding the whole digital graphic design aspects. And yeah, usually the stuff I am doing as a graphic designer really has a purpose. And of course, it's still somewhat creative, but it's not as creative as, for example, making art. It really has to, like, for example, have some sort of structure in the design that it's having, because people read from left to right in our countries, and yeah, that really has to be reminded of. And yeah, so that's really what I feel like makes the huge difference between design and art. And it's so good to know both, right? Like having also kind of that freedom of just being artistic and not being too linear in your work.
So here's my question. So when did you graduate? Like when were you finished with your schooling? Particularly art, like just your, or graphic
art in 2010.
2010. Okay, that's.
And then university in 2014.
2014. Okay. So I guess this is like the thing I keep thinking about with regard to AI and graphic art and illustration and graphic design is, what are art schools doing now? Like, what is the path forward? Like, I imagine if I went to an art school right now, and I've talked to a few friends about this who would know a bit about it. But I imagine if you go to most art schools right now, they aren't necessarily training students in AI tools, alongside these other traditional, at least most universities. So, I mean, I do still think we need, and there is a place for the traditional training in traditional art and illustration and sculpture and that kind of thing. But like, are you getting any sense, particularly, I think in Europe, like when I talk to a lot of people in London, Germany, I guess the Netherlands, like Europe often seems a little bit ahead of the curve when it comes not necessarily to creating tech tools, but utilizing them, especially in the arts. Are you
really?
getting?
Okay.
Well, particularly in London, I think I'm more so thinking mainly London. That our community there, like you create some software and they'll have like a full gallery show, using the software 2 weeks later. So I'm just curious, like in Europe in general, not just Germany, but in Europe, are you getting any sense that art schools out there are beginning to integrate any of these tools? And if not, like just from your perspective as someone who kind of went through the process, like what would you do? What would you tell them to do? How would you advise them?
I think it's still pretty slowly moving forward, right? Like I heard of some, but I think the controversy around it is just like really, like everybody is, I feel like, very mindful about integrating it. And I mean, even when I went to like, I'm not gonna say art school particularly, but more so the design school I went to, stuff really wasn't up to date even back then. And it's moving fast, like all the time. And a lot of professors and university people just like don't really keep up with stuff because they're just like really into their curriculum and they would just want to get their job done, right? Like it's often that's kind of the issue. In art school, however, I would say a lot of people were really, they did a lot of recent stuff also, like trying to implement it. I mean, back then there wasn't like a crazy thing like generative AI coming up, but I think it's still very necessary to at least get on the topic, right? Like to at least say, okay, this is happening out there and it's probably not too smart to ignore it and to hope that it just will go away. I feel like this is kind of the internet era of like we're in. Like a lot of people are just like, oh, it's just like gonna go away at some point. Like this is just some hype. I truly feel like that's not the point. That's not the case here. I actually don't know if too many are integrating it, but I really do hope they do.
Well, looking into your background, correct me if I'm wrong. You taught yourself Photoshop, or am I wrong on that?
Yeah, I just like how everybody just like started with Photoshop. Everybody just like somehow had some way to get it. So yeah, I was just like taking photos, and I wanted to go further and not just have like an image of something I like, but actually be like, okay, I can do so much more with that. Like I want to create a world surrounding that image. And yeah, so I just like taught it myself.
Well, I guess my question is, so when you were in design school, Photoshop wasn't on the menu? Was that not something they were trying to get you trained on, or was it still too new?
We've
Like,
seen it briefly, but everything we've seen was just like briefly. If you don't go deeper yourself, you won't really have any deeper knowledge in it. Basically, university just gives you kind of a direction into stuff, but it doesn't really go into the nitty-gritty of stuff. And I still always say, like, my internship was those 6 months I learned the most about actually all the programs, because I actually had to use them and not just do like some fictive stuff like posters for just like for fun, basically. So yeah, you actually learn stuff by doing it.
it is, well, for something like art and design, is the university obsolete? Make the argument, make the case for why we still need it, given what you
I
just
think
said.
you would probably still need it if you don't know what you really want to do with like your future. Like, it's amazing to get like an idea of something. Like, you get the idea if you want to be a graphic designer or not if you go to design school. And some people just really don't know what they're gonna do or what they want to do. And for them, it's probably a good thing to still have that option to look into it, because often it's really hard to just like motivate yourself to do it.
Okay.
And but yeah, I don't feel like you necessarily need like a Bachelor of Arts or anything like this. But that's like, I'm just talking from personal experience, and I know that's not always the case. Some
Yeah, don't come for
companies,
her university system. I know the
like
professors
some
out there.
companies,
Yeah.
yeah, some companies still really like want to see that you went to university and you have a bachelor and you have a master's. But honestly, in my over 10 years of working, nobody ever asked me that. Like, it's always been about, am I good enough to do the job? Yes or no? And it doesn't matter. I mean, especially like my degree is now 10 years old. Nothing I learned back then is like still usable now. I mean, InDesign was like probably not, I mean, there wasn't even a cloud yet. So that just says it about enough.
The reason I'm obsessed with the university system with regard to AI is that, so many people are talking about the jobs that AI may take away, but they're not talking about the university system. Like, people talked about the internet as kind of like this learning tool, and just being, kind of basically take courses online for free, and you may not need to go to university. But I haven't, in my experience, reporting on technology, I haven't seen a technology develop this rapidly ever. Whether it was the internet, Web 2.0, VR, AR, I haven't seen anything, move this quickly. And the university system around the world is notoriously slow, as you kind of mentioned earlier. And so I don't know. It's like, it sounds like what you're saying. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like if you as a creative person already have a sense of direction, meaning kind of where you want to go, or at least you have a strong sense, you might just want to dive in the deep end and start using the tools. And I think it's looking like, because at least from my vantage point, the university system that's where you go to find kind of the old veterans, like the people who are skilled, steeped in knowledge in various categories. And if the professor has never used the AI tools and you're teaching the professor, it's kind of like, what do you do? So on that note, I kind of want to ask, what is your, can you just really quickly tell people your Instagram? Because your Instagram is amazing for your, in terms of showing your work.
So it's Julie W Design.
At Julie W Design. Julie. One thing I want to ask is, like, what is your workflow? Meaning, I know there's like you're kind of like, you use everything. Like, you're a voracious user of all the tools, which I love. That's why I wanted to talk to you. And I know like kind of one of your favorite tools seems to be Midjourney, but then also mixing Midjourney with Photoshop. Can you just like give me like a sense of like what your tool set is, like your most frequently used tools, what your workflow is, like how you start from A all the way to the end?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I'm really eager to look into all the tools that are out there because I just want to see how I can optimize my workflow, right? Like at the end of the day, if I can save some time at the end of the day and get like more clients or just like more free time, like most importantly, just like more free time out of it, like that's already a win for me. And yeah, I do use a lot of Midjourney and especially in combination of Photoshop because like I don't feel like most most raw outputs are already good enough. They aren't as, or maybe they now are too perfect in a way. Like they are very plasticky. They look very, yeah, just like perfect, and that kind of makes it not real in some sense. So yeah, my workflow usually is just like around, okay, I have an idea in my head that I just want to visualize. And this can be for just like myself, for some, yeah, just like for fun. But this can also just as much be for a client that I'm working on. Like I'm doing a mood board. And for that mood board, instead of doing days of research on Pinterest and Google or wherever, I can actually down that time from usually image research takes a lot of time. Like usually it takes me a good 2 days, whereas now I can down it to 4 hours. And that is pretty crazy to me because as a creative person, you kind of know what you want and you have that visual already in your head that you need. But looking for it is sometimes just like tedious work. And yeah, I mean, it's a lot of time that goes into that. That's kind of where I really wanted to optimize my my knowledge and I really try to perfect my prompting in Midjourney so I can create, yeah, like really, I mean, I mostly do like photography like images, post photography, cinematography, whatever we want to call it. Um, and yeah, from there, if I have the images in Midjourney that I really like, I go to Photoshop and there I just really put it all together. I often on Twitter do my little 4 images that are telling one story. And for Midjourney, it's still pretty hard to keep one consistent color world. So yeah, usually I do a lot of color correcting so the 4 images go together, or even more if for a mood board, adding texture and just like taking away some artifacts that Midjourney might have created. Because I mean, at the end of the day, it's just like a machine generating from your words into an image, and not every pixel can be perfect.
I want to ask you about prompting. So I remember last year, as kind of like the visual AI tools, I think were gaining more traction versus, text and video. And some people were kind of like predicting, okay, we're going to have prompt experts, prompt masters, prompting will be, prompt engineer. You'll be a prompt engineer. And that was like this new job category. And I use all of the tools. I use Midjourney, but I also use Stable Diffusion. And with Stable Diffusion, are you a Stable Diffusion user or not so much?
Not so much. I use it every now and then, and now they're getting pretty pretty nifty, and I do love like looking into it. But yeah, it's just like time-wise, not.
Yeah, no, exactly. So that's what I was going to get to. So with Stable Diffusion, it's time intensive because you're not just dealing with the prompt, but there are all these other controls that you kind of need to pay attention to kind of, but it, I guess someone arguing in favor of Stable Diffusion would say that maybe you can get more control of your work. But my point is, I've been using these tools since last year, and I'm kind of on the fence. I'm not sure how much prompt engineering is a real thing. Like, for example, in some of your work, I know you talked about let's say like for Midjourney, you would use you set the aspect ratio. Maybe sometimes you use the weird prompt, style raw, and 300 or 500. How much at this point is prompt engineering, as they call it, a necessary skill, or is that just kind of like an extra, an extra piece of icing that maybe helps you get a little extra tweak? Like, how important is prompt engineering? Like,
for now, I would still say depending on the tool, but let's stay with Midjourney. I still feel like it's pretty important to know what you're prompting. And a lot of people say like, okay, you just need like 3 words and it gets you exactly what you need. And yes, you get beautiful outputs now with pretty much as little words as possible in Midjourney. But when you strive for that one look or visual that you need, you still, it's good if you know what you want. And here's maybe where it comes back to where university or art school is actually a good thing, because all the firm terms that I learned in art school or
for example,
about photography, exactly, like I use those.
No, like give me a few examples. Like, what are some of the terms?
Oh, like for example, when we learned about cinematography, like you learn about, okay, this is a long shot, this is a medium shot, this is a portrait, macro. Like obviously, like when I say it, a lot of people know it, but people often don't prompt it because they don't realize that it has an effect on the image. But also just like settings on a camera, like aperture, just like lighting, saying like, okay, the lighting is morning sunrise or golden hour. Like those are all terms that you actually have in mind, but often not prompt. But if you do prompt them, it has an effect on your output, right? And I know a lot of people are really on the fence of using like artists or cinematographers, but also just like knowing those people and how they have a certain style or a certain vibe about them, it helps the output, right? And yeah, also sometimes I use painters for photography, not because I want their specific style, but just like their vibe. It sounds so stupid. Like their energy kind of helps the image to come to that certain point. Just knowing all those things in like from art school and design school can help.
Because that last part you just mentioned, that's the controversial area, and we're going to talk about that in a second. Using kind of, I guess, an artist as a reference, or a photographer, or a cinematographer, or film director as a reference, almost as a brushstroke. Like in, let's say, an app like Procreate, there are brush palettes, and the brush will have I don't know, Inkyo ink as the name or whatever. But for visual styles, we don't have as broad a palette. And so I think some people are beginning to use kind of the references that they know from art and photography and film as kind of like the names for those palettes. But before we get into that, because there's something that just happened on that topic. I was fascinated by what you just said about your experience, being trained in art and design, informing your prompting. So my question is, like, let's say, do you think, here's the question, do you think someone who has no artistic design background, traditional, design art background, but they came to visual creation fully through AI, and they learned all these prompts, they learned all these artists and everything, do you think you, or someone like you, not necessarily you, someone like you who is, maybe you've actually, professors taught you how to take film and sculpt and do brushstrokes like various artists, like with actual paint. Do you think you necessarily have a better grasp on even the way in which those prompts are used versus like someone who's a digital, like just an AI first, no art training at all, no design training at all? Do you think you have a better grasp? And if so, why? Why not? Like, how do you see that?
Maybe. Like maybe I understand better like in the prompt what's happening or how it could affect like the output, right? Like I don't necessarily think that it is necessary. Like everything, you can just like learn it. And Midjourney does have the Explorer page. You can look into every image and prompt that is basically there. And often, yeah, you can just like see the pattern of stuff and you can just like look it up, right? Like that's the beauty of the internet. But I mean, of course, it's faster if you already have that background knowledge. Like you just maybe have that little bit of fast track into the whole topic. But that's probably very reflecting just like from me. I know a lot of other graphic designers and like graphic designer friends I'm talking to, they don't get it. And I don't know if it's a thing of it's very complicated in a way. Like, for example, Midjourney in Discord, like if you have no knowledge of Discord, it's really just like tedious to find yourself in there. Or Stable Diffusion, there's like a ton of options you can just like wiggle around, and that alone, like a lot of people are just like, okay, I don't care, I don't want to learn that stuff. But then in like Adobe Photoshop Beta, like the Firefly integration.
Oh, the outpainting.
Everybody uses it.
Yeah, because it's simple, I guess. Yeah.
Exactly. Like it's in your mainstream traditional tool. Like you can just like try it out. You don't have to learn something new about it. And also you don't really need crazy prompts, right? Like when you have Photoshop Beta and you just want to do a dinosaur in the background, like you can just like lasso the stuff you want to integrate a dinosaur in it and done. Like you don't have to prompt the whole output and be, just like that visual about it. Like you can really have like the simplicity of it and go about it.
Well, let me take my previous question one step further, using what you just mentioned, meaning, okay, so now we have people trained traditionally in, traditional art and design versus someone who's kind of just prompting based on references. They have no training. Now let's take it one step further. Someone like yourself, someone like myself, who is I think we're pretty, well, I'm not going to say I'm a good prompt engineer. I'm a decent prompt engineer. I can see from your work, the audience can see from your work, you're a great prompt engineer. But now in very short order, I'll say like in the next 12 to 24 months, we'll have tools that may need little, if any, prompts. And like you kind of what you mentioned with the Adobe tool, the outpainting tool, like that's something that, you could do outpainting on Stable Diffusion and other tools. But when it gets simplified so dramatically, my question is like, will people like yourself and I, who are kind of like, we've invested all this time in prompt engineering, do we have an advantage? Like, because we were early and we like put in the work? Or is this just kind of like, do you think this is like a tiny window of time where people who are like, prompt engineering obsessives, they have like a little advantage, but that will soon mean nothing? Like, what's your take?
I could see that coming, actually. Like a few weeks ago, a lot of people were like, okay, prompt engineering has no future. Like at some point you don't need a prompt anymore. Like you're just gonna type in a word or just like click your stuff together. Like Adobe Firefly does have a lot of options where you can just like go into like the drop down and be like, okay, I want the golden hour and stuff. It could be like that at some point, and to really need as little words for prompting as possible. I don't know if it is an advantage per se, but I have fun with it, right? So I don't regret spending that much time in it and exploring what's possible. But yeah, I do feel like it's going to get very simplified, especially with the very mainstream tools that we're going to see even more integration. And if people are just like, if they know the UI, UX, then it's easier for them to grasp it, right? Like that's just the nature of things.
Well, wait, let me ask you. So what happens to someone like you? Meaning, let's fast forward 5 years from now, and um, I mean, I don't know everything you've worked on, but let's just say I need a packaging design for a campaign for a new brand of, I don't know, cannabis, some cannabis package or whatever packaging. And I need everything from, you know, how the marketing materials will look to how the packaging will look. And maybe I just, as the marketing exec, I just, tell my intern or my assistant, hey, give me something that looked like that thing I saw a couple of days ago, use some prompts that describe that, and it outputs something, now it's all polished. We're 5 years from now, it's all polished and beautiful. And it outputs exactly what that marketing executive wants. What happens to someone like you? Like how do you fit into that future picture?
I see it really realistically. Like, I'm not like, it's not quite doomsday. It's not quite like, oh my God, the future, that's the one. But I often compare it to Canva. Like when Canva came out, and I mean, working in various startups, e-commerce, I also did like the social media design and social media advertising and all that stuff. So graphic designers surrounding me really had like fear of losing that job because of Canva, because now all their clients could just go to Canva and do it themselves, right? Like they can just go in there and design their logo. They can create their social media templates. They can create their ads in there. And yet nothing really changed in my world. Like I still do all that stuff because most people are not creatives. And I mean, it's often also budget. In a way, like, do you want to do that logo for $50? Or do you want to concentrate on a really good client that gives you some direction, what they want, and they are willing to pay $10K? Like, which client do you want? And which one will go to Canva and which one won't? And I kind of probably see it the same way for AI. Like maybe 80% can be tackled by AI, but there's still like those 10% before and after that will be needed in order for it to look actually good. Because even if the intern is somewhat good in it, and I mean, I don't know the intern, right? And maybe it's perfectly possible for them to do it, but if you really value the output and are willing to go that far, like now probably it's just like getting done faster, right? Like we live in a very ASAP kind of world, so it makes total sense that AI is having such a hype right now and is getting used heavily. But I don't really fear that my job's going to be obsolete at some point.
So let me be provocative on this point. So one of the things you posted recently was a video, an AI generated video where it was a bunch of guys at sea.
Adversity at sea, the oceans might resist, that we might see servitude through the surging water. The work of the winds, the watery way. There it bears one away to the sea without oars.
And it was amazing. I think you did it in runwayml. I think that was one of the tools you used, runwayml. But then I think you also, what I love about what you do is you put all the tools together to kind of like get like an interesting end result. And I think you also use like a AI voiceover. Am I right?
Yes.
So AI voiceover, runwayml, maybe there were some other things you used. And so from my understanding, you're not generally or traditionally a filmmaker or someone who has been making films, but that looked really good. I mean, there were a couple of instances where like a hand wasn't exactly right, or, there was like a merging of one figure and another or whatever, but this is early days. We're in early days, and it looked amazing. So let's transfer everything you just said to a filmmaker. So, you're not traditionally a filmmaker as far as I know. So, like in the same way that you might soon disrupt a filmmaker, like, wouldn't someone who isn't trained possibly disrupt your space? I mean, how are you, I guess, you're steeped in these tools, and I'm just wondering how you're making yourself, I guess, an aggressive way to say it would be bulletproof. How are you making yourself bulletproof against, the things that are coming that, threaten to make what you're doing either obsolete or less relevant or less valuable? Like what, like, let's take the filmmaker example. Like, how does that filmmaker stay relevant in the face of these tools from your vantage point? What can they do?
Probably learning it as well, right? Like, I truly feel like AI won't take away any jobs, but people using AI maybe have an advantage to people that don't. And it's just a way of like, if I'm able, like as a non-filmmaker, to create those things, like those people who have actual knowledge in it, they're going to be even faster with it, right? And that's their USP. I don't know. I mean, everything is very disruptive, and there's always new people coming into a field and that are being disruptive. And that's also kind of the beauty of it, because you can't really rely on the stuff you have right now. Like, you can't rely on your abilities you had yesterday. Like, today is a different day, and you really have to stay up to date. And I know it is hard, and it is time consuming to always know what's up in every field, but especially with AI being around, it's really necessary to know it and to try it out. And you don't necessarily need to use it or be super forward, like pro AI. Like, I think it's totally all right if you're not, but it's probably good to still have a look at it. I mean, I did the same thing with Canva, right? Like, I was very like, oh my God, I don't want to use it. Like, I have Photoshop, I don't need it. But I still had a look at it, because I was like, okay, well, if a client now is like, okay, here's my template, can you just like upgrade some stuff? And I'm just like, well, no, I don't want to. Like, that's just not a possibility. And I really, I'm a huge believer in just like staying up to date and trying it, even if it's not your cup of tea, just like having the knowledge of what is going on.
Do you think your attitude is like your peers? Let's just say, forget global. Let's just talk, let's say Europe, European area. Your peers, your colleagues who kind of work in the same space, do they share your attitude? Like, where are they at? Like, in general, like, what's your experience?
I think most people are neutral to more negative about it. Like, a lot of people hate it, and others are just like, I looked into Dall-e too. I tried 2 prompts in Midjourney. I don't get it. I don't care. They maybe have heard about Midjourney. They maybe have heard about ChatGPT, but they don't use it. And others are really highly against it, against using it, against integrating it. Very few are actually using it in the same kind of way I do, probably. I feel like I'm really on the very excessive side. So maybe it's good that not everybody is at that point like I am. But
and just give us the behind the scenes. Like, what's the most frequent negative comment as to why they don't use AI tools?
Mostly ethics.
Okay.
Just like how stuff is being trained, the copyright issues, also not the knowledge of having the commercial rights. Like, is it your stuff that's like, does it belong to you? Can I use it for client work? All those questions usually are a huge factor for being against it.
Okay, so that dovetails perfectly on the next topic, which is, so we're in the first half of July, and just the other day, there was a big Senate hearing here in the United States where a number of people basically went to DC to talk about AI and copyright.
Finally, even though Adobe has trained its AI on permitted work, we understand the concern that an artist can be economically dispossessed by an AI trained on their work that generates art in their style, in the Frank Sinatra example you gave. We believe artists should be protected against this type of economic harm, and we propose Congress establish a new federal anti-impersonation right that would give artists the right to enforce against someone intentionally attempting to impersonate their style or likeness. Holding people accountable who misuse AI tools is a solution we believe goes to the heart of some of the issues our customers have.
One of our distributed artists used a generative AI tool to simultaneously release a single in 6 languages in his own voice on the same day. The generative AI tool extended the artist's creative intent and expression with his consent to new markets and fans instantly. In this case, consent is the key. There is no reason we can't create a legitimate AI marketplace in the service of artists. There's a robust free market for music sampling, synchronization licensing, and deals with new entrants to the digital marketplace, social media companies, and all manner of new technologies. We can do the same thing with AI.
There was one representative from Universal Music to talk about kind of AI generated music and, you know, rights and copyright and how things are trained. And then there was a woman by the name of Carla Ortiz, who I actually follow on Twitter. I follow a lot of kind of like her arguments and kind of like why she feels the way she does. And generally, and I don't want to speak for her, but it seems like, you know, the main thrust of her argument centers around, look, these tools are trained on existing artists and artwork. And in some cases, people are using artist names as prompts or within prompts. And I guess she seems to be pushing for, again, I'm not speaking for her, she seems to be pushing for some way that these AI tools that in many cases have been trained on existing artist work. Just for background, she is a concept artist who has worked on a lot of Marvel properties, Doctor Strange. I'm forgetting the others, but like Doctor Strange is definitely one of them. I feel like she said Black Panther. Like she's worked on some of the biggest Marvel titles, and I guess her goal is to make sure that artists are compensated and credited. This seems to be one of the toughest challenges of being faced by particularly the visual art world, because as you and I both know, you know, it can be very hard to parse. Like when let's just say you take Da Vinci and, you know, in a prompt, Da Vinci and Warhol and Keith Haring and mash them up together. You know, can that be backtraced? Can we figure out how that was generated? Can we for sure know? And then what happens when that prompt in and of itself outputs something, and let's say you tag it as a Darioism. I'll just make up a name, a Darioism. And then that becomes popular, and that becomes its own prompt, and people never use Warhol, Keith Haring, Da Vinci as a mix, and they just use the Darioism prompt to get the look they're looking for. So I guess my question to you is like, so how do you feel? It sounds like you've had these conversations with your colleagues, with your peers. Like, how do you feel about the idea that a lot of these tools, whether it's audio, visual, video, they've been in writing, that they've been trained on existing work? Like, I know this is an impossible, you know, question, you know, to answer, but I'm just curious, like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, how do you, particularly when you're talking to, you know, your peers, like, how do you lay that out?
I mean, the way you told it, just like with the free artists, right? Like, that's art history. That's how it always has been. Like, there has been artists are inspired by, they create a new kind of style, and that all fuses and just like develops new styles. And that's kind of how I see it also happening with AI. But nevertheless, yeah, I do get it. Like, I completely understand if people say like that's not ethical, and I don't approve of that. And I really also do feel like people should get compensated for if the model has been trained on it. And by now, probably nothing on the internet has been saved by it, right? Like, there's probably no way there's anything that wasn't touched in some way in all categories, like be it text, visual, video, music, everything. It's probably I'm coming more from a designer perspective rather than an artist, because if I were an artist for my whole life, like traditional artist, I know that I would be pissed if all that stuff that I worked years on to develop my own kind of style and then just getting used blandly by other people. I know that it could probably piss me off, but maybe I would also be flattered. Like, I don't know. I'm honestly like, some days I'm like, maybe I would be flattered actually if that people love my style that much that they want to evolve on it. And then again, it depends on the output. If it's just like a bland copy, then obviously I'm just like, okay, well, you could have just copy pasted my image and then whatever. But if you use it as an inspiration for your own kind of output, that's basically design. Like, as a designer, that's kind of just like what I do. I, like, for all my mood boards, like, that's all I do. Like, I see images and I get inspired by them, and that's how I create something new out of it. Say like, okay, if I were an artist, I would probably think differently than if I, like right now, am a designer. Probably before all of that stuff has like come to the world, there probably would have been a regulation of some sort. I don't know if it's too late now already, or...
That's the issue, yeah. That's the issue. Because I remember, well, specifically with regard to journalism, which is like that's been the bulk of my career. Last year, I saw, the AI visual tools coming to the fore, and I immediately connected the dots and said, okay, we'll have AI generated stories. And so I immediately, went to my then union rep and I said, hey, I'm not, I'm kind of working on this other stuff, but as a union guy, or rep, this will probably become a labor issue in the not too distant future. No one really picked it up. And now, without getting too specific, in the world of journalism, there are a number of very heated arguments with regard to AI generated articles. And actually, this makes me think of kind of like when we started the episode, I said this is a historic day. And now I want to kind of like come full circle on that. So this is Thursday. And I believe just about something like 6 to 10 hours ago, the deadline passed for the Screen Actors Guild, which is the union that represents Hollywood actors, for them to have a deal with the organization representing Hollywood studios.
Because the AMPTP remains unwilling to offer a fair deal on key issues essential to protecting the livelihoods of working actors and performers, SAG-AFTRA's national board unanimously voted to issue a strike order against the studios and streamers.
The entire business model has been changed by streaming, digital, AI. This is a moment of history that is a moment of truth. If we don't stand tall right now, we are all going to be in trouble. We are all going to be in jeopardy of being replaced by machines.
Groundbreaking AI proposal that they gave us yesterday. In that groundbreaking AI proposal, they proposed that our background performers should be able to be scanned, get paid for 1 day's pay, and their company should own that scan, their image, their likeness, and should be able to use it for the rest of eternity in any project they want with no consent and no compensation. So if you think that's a groundbreaking proposal, I suggest you think again.
The Writers Union, the Hollywood Writers Union, the Writers Guild of America, they've been on strike for a little over 3 months. And so now I think the vote is like, even as we speak, there may be a union vote for the Screen Actors Guild as to whether they will in fact strike. And if that happens, I think the last time there was like a full Hollywood shutdown was like 1960. So this will be unprecedented. And remember, in 1960, there were no streaming services. So in a way, they'll have less leverage, because even if Hollywood shuts down for however long, you'll still have Hulu, Disney Plus, Apple TV to go to. Maybe not as many new things will be created, and productions will be stopped, but the leverage won't be, as much as it might have been in years past. So there's a film, and I bring this up all the time, but I refuse to drop this. It's called The Congress and stars Robin Wright. And the idea in The Congress is that an actor basically is aging out. At one point she was like, the beautiful, leading lady of all these films, and now she's becoming older. And her agent says, okay, well, there's a new service that captures your digital image, and they'll be able to use you in films forever at the age you're at now. So even when you're 80 and you can't really show up on screen, we'll still be able to use the young version of Robin Wright in a number of films. And, you get to sign your rights away and you make the profit. And this came out in 2013, this film, The Congress. That's just 10 years ago. And now, and I've been hammering this film for years, just hammering please, telling people to watch it. And now this is exactly what the Screen Actors Guild is concerned about. One of their chief issues is that they're concerned that there will be, digital representations of themselves in films used either without their permission, or maybe it won't be as lucrative as their current deals. I'm just curious, like, as someone, the fact that you're using like runwayml and you're just so steeped in all these tools, like how are you, is this tapping your science fiction brain? Like what are you following any of this? How do you see the future? Like, I'm just curious, like where are you at on this?
It's definitely crazy times we're gonna see. Yeah, I mean, I heard a little bit about it. I didn't caught up on it like too recently, but yeah, I kind of fear that it could be the future, especially since it's all evolving so rapidly. Like, I think the speed of it is more the issue than the stuff itself, maybe. Because if there would be time, there could be just like options around it. Like, do we actually have the permissions? Do we have the copyrights or whatever? Just like it has been before. But now it's just like there. Everything's there. So it's really hard to take it away again. And I also fear that it probably won't. And yeah, I mean, I do fear for a lot of stuff that is going to change out there, like everything. I mean, I also fear for graphic design, but in a way, I didn't want the fear to hold me back. Like, of course, I could just like I think a year ago, I started the first time in Dall-e too, and I could have just been like, don't care, don't want it, don't need it. And just now, a year later, I wouldn't know what's up or what's out there, and I don't want to be left behind. And I feel like that is a huge part of it, because people fear about getting left behind. And that's why we all use it. And that's why we all keep evolving those things. And in a way, it's probably bad. But on the other hand, someone else will do it. And I don't know. It's
yeah, I mean, I mean,
circle.
some of the embrace of the tools is fear, but I think more of it is people like yourself who have just a genuine curiosity. I know for myself, you know, I, I want to say something. So I remember I hit a point where using AI art generating tools or AI image generating tools where I just hit a point where I felt like I really have a handle on this. I know what I'm doing. I know how to get the look I want. And like I have some pretty strong prompt engineering skills or whatever. And I remember hitting a point where I thought, you know, I want to go draw. I want to go paint.
Exactly.
It was
Yeah.
this weird, I never expected it, but it was this weird sensation where I thought, okay, this stuff looks beautiful. I love it. But suddenly I am almost in a competitive way. I was
Yep.
inspired to sit down and draw, paint. And so I think that's kind of like an under-discussed part of kind of like the mental cycle, you know, creative people go through with these tools. With Hollywood, I don't know. I just think the speed thing you bring up, I think that's the central issue. I think that's the most probably that's probably what's creating a lot of the angst and concern, because if the development cycle for a lot of these AI tools was, let's say, 10 years, right? People would have more time, you know, cinematographers, audio people, directors, they would have more time to kind of slowly fold these tools into their tool set and figure out how to use them and innovate with them. And gradually over time, you know, rights would be figured out, you know, in terms of like, you know, whose name can't you use? And, you know, is there some, you know, kind of derivative, you know, royalty paid, you know, to those people. But this has moved far quicker than almost any technology I've seen in recent memory. And I think that is what's creating a lot of the, in some cases, anger, in some cases, fear. But I think, you know, part of the reason I wanted to like sit down and talk to you is just, I think you have the right approach, which is you're not necessarily saying this is all good or it's all bad, but you dove in with both feet and you're trying everything. And you're learning, meaning if someone asks you about this, you can speak from experience. You're not speculating. And I think that's kind of like my biggest concern when I speak to kind of traditional creators, be they filmmakers or illustrators, is that they're speculating on tools they haven't used. And it's kind of like talking about Photoshop or nonlinear editing, like Final Cut. You know, I remember having a heated argument with a film reviewer years ago, like a professional film reviewer. Oh gosh, I want to say 2006, something like that, 2006, 2007, heated because he was talking about, you know, the value of film over digital filmmaking and tools like Final Cut. And I said, you know, there's a place for both, but, you know, you're kind of not being realistic if you don't think Final Cut and digital filmmaking will begin to take over. And it was a heated argument. And I kind of see the same thing. It's like this person wasn't steeped in the digital tools. And I kind of see the same thing. I think if we're going to have these conversations and talk about what is and what's good about them and what isn't, you have to know the tools to discuss
Exactly.
them. So I'll kind of like end it on that. Is there anything kind of like just in the general space that you wanted to get off your chest that I didn't ask with my, you know, long rant, you know?
No, I mean, I totally agree with you. Like, you at least have to just like try it out. Like, you don't have to promote it or not. But if you've never used it, you can't really form like an opinion about it. And that's like the biggest thing for me. Like, a lot of people just hate it because it's cool to hate. Like, that's always kind of the way. And it's just kind of sad because there truly are people that will use it mindfully and in a good kind of way. I mean, as good as it can be. Like, it's a tool at the end of the day, and I use it as a tool, and I never really like put raw I always call it raw outputs out there. Like, it always has some touch of myself, and it made me even more creative. Like, I finally learned After Effects because I was like, I want to do something more with those videos I have now. And yeah, I just kind of dived in. And that again is like a traditional tool. So it's really about the tandem of traditional and generative, and it's probably the future. I guess it's the future. It's kind of like the whole kind of boomer this cycle all over again, where you just like go, oh, the internet, that's not going to stick around. And then if you say the same thing about AI, I don't know, maybe in 10 years, it's going to be a rough awakening, right? Like,
yeah, and I want to key in on something you said. I believe you refer to After Effects as a traditional tool. Am I right? Is that what? Yeah. Now it's a traditional tool.
Yeah, exactly.
But once upon a time, I remember, people were kind of like, you're cheating, you're making it easy for yourself. So we're kind of, like you said, we're going through that same cycle of people kind of resisting innovation. This is definitely a different kind of innovation. It's far more disruptive than anything in the past, but I think this is the way to go in terms of learning the tools rather than just kind of like putting blinders on and deciding, well, I'm just going to keep going my own way. Julie, thanks a lot for joining us. Can you tell people, give us your social, your website, tell people how to find your work?
So yeah, I post a lot on Twitter. So it's probably everywhere the same kind of handle. It's always Julie W Design. I think on Twitter it's with like a little dash or something because my handle was gone. On Instagram it's the same. And yeah, from there there's just like a link in bio where I can just like go dabble into my portfolio and everything and just see like more the graphic design part of my life. And yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Julie. I really appreciate you joining us, and we will keep an eye on what you're doing, particularly the film work. I think there's a future there for you. That what you put together was pretty amazing.
I really love it. See, I would have never dabbled into that world if it wouldn't have been for just like testing new tools out, right? Like, it's really fun. I mean, I don't know where it will take me, but I just know I'm having a lot of fun with it.
There you go. Thanks again, Julie.